This is a crime. A nearly $2 trillion crime where the victims are paying for their own sentence. For generations, we've been told the same story. Go to college, get a good job, live the American dream. It was the golden ticket. But what happens when the golden ticket turns into a ball and chain? Today, over 42 million Americans are shackled by $1.8 trillion in student loan debt. This isn't just a personal finance issue. This is a systemic failure that has been engineered over 40 years. The question isn't just how did we get here? The real question is, was this an accident? Or was it by design? The student debt crisis wasn't caused by one single thing, it's the result of a perfect storm. To understand how the promise of higher education became a trap, we need to look at three key pieces. First, the runaway cost of tuition itself, which has outpaced inflation by an insane margin. Second, a catastrophic change in federal law that turns student loans into a type of super debt almost impossible to escape. And third, the bizarre amenities arms race where colleges started acting more like luxury resorts than educational institutions. Let's follow the money and see how a good investment broke an entire generation.
To really get a grip on this crisis, you have to start with the price tag. Just how much has it changed? Let's put this in perspective. Since 1980, the price of pretty much everything has gone up. That's inflation. But the cost of college tuition and fees hasn't just gone up, it's launched into orbit. We're talking about a 1,200% increase since 1980, while the cost of all other consumer goods went up by about 236%. Think about it this way. If a new car's price had inflated like college tuition, you'd be paying over $500,000 for a Honda Civic today. So what gives? Well, a big part of the story is the retreat of public funding. In the past, states saw higher education as a public good and subsidized a huge chunk of the cost of public universities. But starting in the 80s and accelerating after the 2008 recession, states slashed their higher education budgets. When the state pays less, the university has to get the money from somewhere else. And that somewhere else was you. They passed the bill directly onto students and their families in the form of higher tuition. At the same time, the federal government made it easier and easier to borrow money. They expanded federal loan programs, meaning that students could borrow more to meet those rising prices. But this had an unintended consequence, something called the Bennett Hypothesis. The theory goes that the more financial aid is available, the more confident colleges feel raising their prices, knowing students can just borrow more to cover the difference. It created a vicious cycle. Higher tuition led to more borrowing, and more available loans led to even higher tuition. The sticker price was out of control, but the real trap was yet to be set.
So tuition is skyrocketing, but that's only half of the nightmare. The other half is what happens when you can't pay. For almost any other type of debt, credit cards, a mortgage, a car loan, there's a last resort safety net, bankruptcy. But for student loans, that safety net was ripped away. In 2005, Congress passed a massive overhaul of bankruptcy law. Tucked inside this bill was a provision that changed everything for student borrowers. It made private student loans, the kind you get from a bank, not the government, nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. Federal loans were already difficult to get rid of, but this new law slammed the door shut for virtually all educational debt. Before 2005, you could treat private student loans like any other consumer debt. After 2005, they became a special category of super debt. To get rid of them, you have to prove in court that paying them back would cause an undue hardship. This is an incredibly high legal bar to clear. You essentially have to prove you have a certainty of hopelessness. Basically, that you will never, ever be able to pay it back for the rest of your life. This one legal change had a devastating impact. Lenders now had zero risk. They could give out massive loans to 18-year-olds with no credit history and no income, knowing that the debt could never be erased. It created a moral hazard on an epic scale. The result? Private student loan debt tripled in the decade following the law's passage. Young people were making life-altering financial decisions before they could even legally buy a beer, taking on debts that would follow them to the grave. So we have out-of-control prices and inescapable debt, but where was all that money going? Well, if you visited a college campus recently, you've seen it. Welcome to the amenities farms race. To attract students in an increasingly competitive market, colleges started spending billions on things that have nothing to do with education. We're talking state-of-the-art gyms, gourmet dining halls that look like five-star restaurants, and dorms that are more like luxury condos. Louisiana State University famously built an $85 million rec center with a lazy river shaped like the school's initials. Colleges weren't just competing on academics anymore, they were competing on lifestyle. The logic was simple: build it and they will come. And this spending wasn't just on facilities. Administrative bloat became a huge issue, with layers upon layers of highly paid, non-teaching staff. All of this costs money. A lot of money, and every dollar spent on a climbing wall or another vice dean of student experience is a dollar that gets passed on to students in the form of higher tuition funded by those indestructible loans. It turned the university from a place of learning into a product to be consumed.
So let's connect the dots. First, states cut funding, forcing colleges to raise tuition. Then, the federal government made it easy to borrow more, creating a feedback loop of price hikes. To justify these prices and compete for students, universities went on a spending spree, building campus resorts. And finally, the 2005 bankruptcy law removed the final safety net, locking millions of people into a lifetime of debt. It wasn't a single decision, but a cascade of them that built this trap. The consequences had been catastrophic. This debt is delaying home ownership, preventing people from starting businesses, and even influencing decisions about marriage and children. It's a massive drag on our entire economy. What was sold as a tool for social mobility has become an anchor weighing down a generation. The promise was that a degree would set you free. The reality for millions is that the bill for that degree has put them in a prison. And we, as a country, are all paying the price.